The pie was already in the oven when my phone buzzed. I almost didn't check it. My hands were dusted with flour, and the kitchen smelled the way it only does in November brown sugar, cloves, the particular warmth that comes from a house that knows it's about to be full of people. I wiped my hands on the dish towel my late husband Raymond had bought me 22 years ago, the one that said home is where the pie is in faded red stitching. I picked up my phone. It was a text from my son-in-law, Derek. "Hey, Carol. Just wanted to give you a heads up before things get too far along. Melissa and I talked, and we're going to keep Thanksgiving small this year. Just our immediate family. We hope you understand. No hard feelings." I read it 3 times. Then I set the phone face down on the counter and stood very still, listening to the hum of the oven and the sound of my own breathing. No hard feelings. I am 67 years old. I was born in Savannah, Georgia, raised on a street where everybody's grandmother sat on the porch, and nobody locked their doors until 9 o'clock at night. I have buried a husband, raised a daughter mostly on my own after Raymond got sick, worked 31 years as a school administrator, and saved money the way my mother taught me, quietly, consistently, without telling anyone the number. I have never in my life asked for a standing ovation. I just always assumed that the people I loved knew what I had done for them. That assumption, I was learning, was the most expensive mistake I ever made. Let me back up. Because this story doesn't start with that text message. It starts the way most quiet devastations start, so slowly you don't notice until you're already standing in the middle of it. My daughter Melissa is 41. She has her father's eyes and my stubbornness, which is either a blessing or a curse, depending on the day. She married Derek 8 years ago in a ceremony I paid for, partly because I wanted to, and partly because Derek's parents made it clear early on that they were, as his mother Patricia put it, not in a position to contribute significantly. They contributed a cheese board and a card. I don't say that to be bitter. I say it because it matters later. The first few years were fine. I was Grandma Carol before I was even a grandmother, cooking Sunday dinners, babysitting their dog Biscuit when they traveled, driving 2 hours each way to be there when Melissa had her first miscarriage at 3 in the morning because Derek had a work trip he couldn't cancel. I held her in the hospital bathroom while she cried, and I drove home the next morning and went straight to work because I had a staff meeting at 8 and I didn't tell a single soul where I'd been. That's what mothers do. We show up, and we don't keep score. But somewhere along the way, the relationship started to feel like a ledger that only one person was filling in. It began with small things. Melissa stopped calling just to talk. Our conversations became transactional. She needed me to watch the kids. She needed my chicken casserole recipe for a potluck. She needed to know if I could loan her and Derek money for a new HVAC unit. Because it's just sitting in your savings account, Mom. It's not doing anything. That was the phrase that stuck with me. It's not doing anything, as though my security, the money I had set aside with careful hands over 3 decades, existed primarily as a resource waiting to be drawn upon. I gave them the money for the HVAC, $12,000. I told myself it was fine. They'd pay it back when they could. That was 4 years ago. Then came last spring. Melissa called on a Tuesday, which was unusual enough that I felt a little flicker of hope. Maybe she just wanted to talk. But she had her business voice on, the one she uses when she's already decided something and is just delivering the news. She told me that Derek's parents were moving. Patricia and Gerald had been living in a condo in Phoenix, but Gerald's health was declining, and they wanted to be closer to family. Melissa and Derek had decided, past tense, conversation already over, that the best solution was for Patricia and Gerald to move into the house, their house. The house where my grandchildren lived, the house that I had helped them buy. When Melissa was 34 and she and Derek wanted to purchase their home in Marietta, they were $40,000 short of the down payment. I gave it to them. Not loaned, Gave. Because Melissa was my daughter, and I wanted her to have a stable home, and I never imagined a world in which that gesture would one day feel like a stone in my shoe. I didn't say any of that on the phone. I asked how the kids felt about it. I asked how much space Patricia and Gerald would have. I asked all the practical, reasonable questions of a woman who has learned that her feelings are most safely expressed into a pillow at 10 o'clock at night. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. Thanksgiving has always been my holiday. Not Christmas. Christmas belongs to everyone, and there's enough goodwill in the season to go around. But Thanksgiving was mine. Raymond and I started hosting it the first year we were married, 1,984, in a 600-square-foot apartment with a card table and folding chairs and a turkey so dry, we still laughed about it 30 years later. After he passed, I kept hosting. I kept the tradition alive because it was the one time of year the whole family gathered under the same roof, and I could look around the table and feel like everything I had built still meant something. This year, I had already started planning in September. I had a notebook, a real paper notebook, the spiral kind where I kept my Thanksgiving lists. Menu on the left page, tasks on the right. I had called my favorite catering company, Southern & Co., and placed a partial order for their cornbread dressing and mac and cheese because my knees weren't what they used to be. And standing at the stove for 8 hours had stopped being romantic and started being orthopedic. I had ordered personalized place cards for the kids off Etsy, little wooden turkeys with their names painted on in gold. I had already bought the cranberry sauce, the good kind in the glass jar, 6 of them because Derek's family went through it at an alarming rate. I had spent, at that point, approximately $600. With the catering deposit, the total was closer to $900, and now I was holding a phone with a text message that said, "No hard feelings." I want to be honest about what happened inside me in that moment, because I think honesty is the only thing that makes a story worth telling. What I felt first was not anger. What I felt first was something older and quieter than anger. It was the particular grief of realizing that someone you love has been looking at you and not quite seeing you for a very long time. And you were the last one to know. I put the phone in my pocket. I went and sat in Raymond's chair by the window. I still call it Raymond's chair. Always will, and I looked out at the backyard where the dogwood tree had gone red and gold, and I thought about my mother. My mother, Ida May, used to say, "Carol, you can pour yourself out for people, but don't pour so much that when you reach down for yourself there's nothing left." I was 30-something when she said it, and I thought I understood. I was 67 before I actually did. I did not call Melissa back that night. I did not call her back the next morning either. What I did was call my friend Ruth Ann. Ruth Ann has been my best friend for 34 years. We met at a school board conference in 1991 and discovered we had the same opinions about standardized testing and sweet tea, which is apparently enough to build a lifetime on. She lost her husband 3 years before I lost Raymond, and we have been each other's steady company ever since Sunday phone calls, quarterly trips to the outlet mall, the kind of friendship where you can say the real thing without preamble. I told her everything. The text, the HVAC money, the down payment, the years of showing up in the slow, quiet way I had apparently become furniture present, useful, unremarkable. Ruth Ann was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "So what are you going to do about Thanksgiving?" I said I didn't know yet. She said, "Well, you know I'm free." I thought about that all day. I also thought about Patrice and Donna. Patrice was a woman I'd met through church, newly widowed, sharp as a tack, with a laugh that could rearrange the furniture. Donna was my former colleague from the district office, recently retired, who had been talking for 2 years about how her son and his wife kept meaning to visit but hadn't managed it yet. 3 women, all of us somewhere between 64 and 71. All of us, I suspected, familiar with the specific loneliness of being loved in theory and forgotten in practice. I called them both. I will not pretend that what I did next was easy. It wasn't. I am a woman who was raised to keep the peace, to smooth things over, to be the soft landing place for everyone around me. What I did next felt, at first, like holding my breath underwater. I called Southern & Co., and I canceled the catering order. The woman on the phone was gracious about the deposit. They had a policy, but she said she could apply it toward a future order, and I told her I'd be in touch. Then I went online, and I found the Etsy shop where I'd ordered the place cards. I messaged the seller, explained there'd been a change of plans. She refunded me without question. I looked at the 6 jars of cranberry sauce on my counter for a long moment. Then I went to my laptop, and I started looking at mountain cabin rentals. I had never been to the North Georgia mountains in November. I had driven through them in summer, seen the green rise of Springer Mountain from a highway, but I had never stopped, never stayed. I found a cabin outside of Blue Ridge, 4 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, a fireplace you could stand inside of, a hot tub on the back deck that looked out over a ridge of trees. The reviews said the sunrises were something you wouldn't forget. I booked it for 4 nights, Wednesday through Sunday. Then I sat back in my chair and I felt something move through my chest that I hadn't felt in longer than I could say. Not happiness exactly. Something steadier than happiness. Something that felt like reclaiming something I hadn't realized I'd given away. I still hadn't responded to Derek's text. I thought about what to say for 2 days. I wrote several versions in my head, some of them dignified, 1 or 2 of them considerably less so. I thought about Raymond, who used to say that the most powerful thing a person can do in an argument is say less than they feel. I thought about my mother, her voice, her warning. Finally, on Thursday evening, I typed back, "Understood, Derek. I hope you all have a wonderful holiday. I've made other plans." That was all. Melissa called 20 minutes later. Her voice was bright, in the way voices get when someone is trying to sound casual about something that isn't casual. She said she'd seen my text to Derek. She just wanted to make sure I was okay. She hoped I wasn't upset. It really was just about keeping things simple this year. Patricia and Gerald were getting older, and the travel was hard for them. I let her talk. I have learned in 67 years that sometimes you let people explain themselves all the way to the end of their explanation, because that's where the truth usually lives. When she was finished, I said, "Melissa, I'm fine. I've made plans with Ruth Ann and some friends. I'm going to the mountains." There was a pause. She said, "The mountains?" I said, "Blue Ridge. I rented a cabin. We leave Wednesday." Another pause. Longer this time. She said, "Mom, you didn't have to do that. You could still come. It's just going to be a smaller gathering this year." And here is where I said the thing I had been practicing in my head for 2 days. Not cruelly, not loudly, quietly, the way you say the truest things. I said, "Sweetheart, I know I could, but I want you to think about something. I have shown up for this family for 41 years. I paid for your wedding. I gave you and Derek the down payment on your house. I sat with you in a hospital bathroom at 3 in the morning when you needed me, and I never once asked you to acknowledge it. I'm not saying those things to hurt you. I'm saying them because I realized recently that somewhere along the way, I stopped being your mother and started being a resource. And I don't want to be a resource anymore. I want to be your mother. When you're ready for that, I'll be here." Melissa was quiet for so long, I thought the call had dropped. Then she said, very softly, "Mom, just that. Just my name." The way she used to say it when she was small and had woken up from a bad dream. I said, "Have a good Thanksgiving, baby. I love you." And I hung up. I am not going to tell you that I didn't cry after that. I sat in Raymond's chair, and I cried in the way you cry when you are not sad exactly, but you are releasing something that has been stored in your body for a very long time. Something heavy that you carried so long, you stopped feeling the weight of it until the moment you set it down. Then I blew my nose, washed my face, and called Ruth Ann to tell her to pack warm layers because the mountain nights were going to be cold. We left that Wednesday morning, the four of us, Ruth Ann, Patrice, Donna, and me, in my Buick, with the heated seats and a playlist Patrice made that started with Aretha Franklin and ended with something her granddaughter had recommended that none of us entirely understood, but we danced to anyway somewhere. On I 575, the cabin was more beautiful than the pictures. The porch wrapped around the whole back of the house, and when we arrived just before sunset, the sky over the ridge was the color of a peach, that deep, almost dark gold that only exists for about 4 minutes before it goes purple and then black. We stood on that porch, the four of us, not saying anything for a moment, and I thought about all the Thanksgivings I had spent making sure everyone else was comfortable, everyone else was fed, everyone else felt seen. Ruth Ann put her arm around my shoulder and said, "Look at that." I looked. Thanksgiving morning, we cooked together in that big kitchen Ruth Ann's cornbread from scratch, Patrice's sweet potato pie, Donna's green beans with the smoked turkey neck, and I made my dressing the way my mother taught me, with the giblets and the sage and the particular patience it requires. We set the table with the cabin's mismatched dishes, and we lit candles, and we ate for 2 hours, and we laughed so hard at one point that Patrice had to excuse herself, and I cannot even tell you what was funny, because the joy of it wasn't in the joke. It was in the room. It was in who was in the room. It was in the simple and profound fact that every single person at that table wanted to be there. My phone rang twice during dinner. I saw Melissa's name. I let it go to voicemail. On Saturday morning, I sat on the porch alone before the others were awake, wrapped in a quilt, watching the mist move through the valley below. I thought about a lot of things. I thought about Raymond, how much he would have loved this view. I thought about my mother, and whether I had finally, at 67, learned the lesson she had been trying to teach me. I thought about Melissa, not with anger, but with the particular tenderness you feel for someone you love who is also, right now, causing you pain. I thought about what I would say when she called again. Because she would call again, I knew my daughter. Beneath the distance and the busyness and the years of taking me for granted, she was still the little girl who said Mom like it was a complete sentence. That part of her didn't go anywhere. It just got buried under adult life and a husband who had his own family to manage, and the general human tendency to treat reliable things as permanent. On Sunday, we loaded up the Buick. Before I started the engine, Ruth Ann looked at me and said, "How do you feel?" I thought about it honestly. The way she deserved. I said, "Like myself. I feel like myself." She nodded like that was exactly the right answer. The Monday after Thanksgiving, Melissa called again. I answered this time. Her voice was different, the brightness was gone, and what was underneath it was raw and a little ashamed, which is a hard combination to sit with, but it's an honest one. She said she had talked to Derek. She said she had been doing a lot of thinking. She said she was sorry, not the reflexive, conversation-ending sorry, but the slower kind, the kind that cost something. She said she didn't realize how much she had let things shift, how long it had been since she'd called just to hear my voice, how she had started thinking of me as someone who would always be there, and stopped thinking of me as someone who had a life and needs and feelings of her own. She said, "I don't want you to feel like an ATM, Mom." Those were her words. Her own words, not mine. I said, "I know you don't, baby." That's not who you are. That's just what happens when people get busy and stop paying attention. The good news is, you can pay attention again. We talked for an hour and a half. The longest we had talked in years. I am not going to tell you that everything is fixed, because that would be a tidy ending, and real life doesn't traffic in tidy endings. I am going to tell you that Melissa and I are talking differently now, more honestly, more carefully, with the kind of attention that you give to things you've realized you almost lost. I am going to tell you that Derek brought me flowers last week when they came for Sunday dinner, which he has never done before in 8 years of marriage, and he looked me in the eye when he handed them to me and said, "Thank you for everything you've done for our family," and I accepted it with grace, because that is what the moment called for. I am going to tell you that the 6 jars of cranberry sauce are still in my pantry, and I am going to use them for Christmas, which I am hosting at my house with my daughter and my grandchildren and my son-in-law and, yes, probably Patricia and Gerald, because I am not a woman who holds grudges. I am a woman who holds boundaries, and those are very different things. And I am going to tell you because I think this is the most important part. The part my mother was trying to tell me all those years ago, the part I had to drive to the mountains in November to finally understand that the most loving thing I have ever done for my daughter was not write the check or show up at 3 in the morning or host 39 years of Thanksgiving dinners. The most loving thing I ever did was let her feel what happened when I stopped. Not as punishment, not with cruelty, but as truth. Because sometimes the people who love us most need to understand what the world looks like without us in it before they can truly understand what it looks like with us. I have a new notebook now. Same kind, spiral, from the drugstore on the corner. On the first page, I wrote 2 things. The first is my mother's saying, "Don't pour so much, that when you reach down for yourself there's nothing left." The second is something I wrote myself, on that porch in Blue Ridge, watching the mist move through the valley on a cold November morning, while the people I loved were still sleeping and the world was quiet and entirely, briefly, mine. I wrote, "I am not the backup plan. I am the blessing. And blessings have the right to choose where they land. I am 67 years old. I have a Buick with heated seats and a best friend who makes cornbread from scratch and a daughter who is learning, slowly, how to see me. That is enough. That is more than enough. That is, as it turns out, everything.